Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of this committee. It's a unique committee that the Parliament is supporting in partnership with Young Women Lead, and that's a leadership project that 26 young women from across Scotland are participating in. Some of these young women are around the table today and others are with us in the public gallery. So I'm very delighted to welcome both the committee members and our panellists to this session. And the session will run until about 12:15. Can I also welcome those who are watching online and thank you for your interest in the work that we're doing. Before I move on to the formal business, agenda item number 1 is to agree to take items 3 and 4, consideration of the evidence we hear today in the committee's work programme, in private. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is an evidence session on the transition from education to employment for young women from ethnic minorities. This committee met in January and agreed the topic of inquiry, and it's about looking at the issue of access to employment, in particular the recruitment, retention and development of young women from ethnic minorities. I'm delighted to welcome our witnesses this morning, and I will ask them to introduce themselves. Surjit.
Surjit Dillon from SEMVO Scotland. I am the Confidence and Wellbeing Officer.
Fergus McMillan.
Hello, Fergus McMillan from Skills Development Scotland. I'm Senior Equality and Diversity Advocate at SDS.
Trishna Singh.
I'm Trishna Singh and I'm the Founder Director of Sikh Sanjog, an organisation based in Edinburgh working with women from the Sikh community.
Viana Maya.
Hello, I'm Viana Maya and I'm the Pre-Spec Coach Lead at AI Employability, and we provide coaching and support for Black and minority ethnic people to get into work.
Dilraj Soki Watson.
Morning everyone, I'm Dilraj Soki Watson from Amna Muslim Women's Resource Centre. I'm the acting co-CEO at the moment. We work with minority ethnic and Muslim women across Scotland.
Thank you very much, panel, and welcome. The way that the meeting will work is that our committee members will ask questions. They may be to a specific person or they may ask for an opinion from everyone. I'll keep my eye on the time, and if you want to join in on anything particular, please just indicate to me and we'll make sure that everyone gets a contribution. You will see the microphone in front of you, of course, and it should be about maybe 12 inches a foot away from you when you're speaking. You don't need to press buttons or do anything. That will all just happen wondrously. Thank you very much. We'll open proceedings and I'll go to our first question, will be from Sarah.
So basically this is a question for everyone. So to begin this discussion off, I'd like to emphasise that there definitely is certain factors that young women from ethnic minority backgrounds do face when moving into employment. So therefore I would like to ask the panel to briefly identify these main issues.
Yes, who would like to proceed to set us off? Surjit.
Yes, I'll start off if that's okay. Yes, there's many factors and barriers that these young women face, and if I can give you a flavour for some of those, there is a variety, and I think the one that's foremost is racism and discrimination. There's unconscious bias. There's also a lack of understanding from our clients, and also employers themselves as well. There's also a feeling, whether it's there or not, from our young women clients that employers are not receptive to different cultures as well. So maybe there's an underlying reason for that understanding. There's also, I do have a really quite a long list here, but I'll be very brief. But there's a parental lack of knowledge of opportunities as well. I know that my colleagues around the table are doing some great work to overcome that. There is the cultural barriers. Again, that's a huge umbrella, and there's a lot of issues underneath that umbrella as well. There's individual reasons as well, and I think it's very important that we don't stereotype young women, because each young woman has her own issues or concerns. And just to give you a wee flavour of just one or two of them, I mean, I've come across young women who have been told by parents that they can't interact with males from a very early age. So that then they're on the back foot throughout their educational life and then going on to employment. And I do have others, but I'll just finish off with one other one, and we can maybe explore this later on, the others that I have, is a lot of young women are now hidden figures. Once they've left education, if they're not signing on or they're not visible in the system somewhere, culturally their families will support them and financially. So they're not seen to be part of any figures that are seen or any data. So just as a wee flavour, so I'll stop it there just to give anybody else an opportunity as well.
Trishna.
Services for the past 30 years and working with young women, and we've worked with them through that process of them actually getting ready to leave school, receiving career guidance at the schools, and a lot of the schools, sadly, even today, there's lots of assumptions around there. So when young Asian girls go for career guidance, they're actually, some of them are actually told that, why do you need this? Because you're going to have an arranged marriage. Now, we have proof of these things, and that's just to give you a small anecdote of what is going on even now within the schools. But we know that what Surjit's just said about the job centres, we know that when girls leave school, they will not go and sign on at the job centres because there's still stigma attached to that of being unemployed. Once you leave school, you're lost. You're not in any statistical data, and that is going back about 25 years. And we have worked with job centres and with the Scottish Government and all of the different schemes that came out starting from the New Deal, way back in the late 90s. And we encouraged and supported young women from these communities to actually sign on for these programmes. But it was only because of our hand-holding that they managed to get through that, and actually we gave some numbers to add to the reports that were put back in after these schemes were launched. And throughout, even now, we have created positions within our organisation for roles like youth workers, and these are the things that young people do not look at as a career: community development work, youth work. And we have created these kind of internal placements within Sikh Sandog to encourage young women to say, but look, you can look at this as a career. But these are things, but what's happening out there is, sadly, there is so much discrimination and racism going on, and it's what's happening with all the equality frameworks and all of these kind of processes that are being put out there. They're there in paper. Until their legislation and its law, nothing's going to change. Do you know? And I speak with 30 years of experience. I've not just, thought, all right, but we've worked with women to get there's an age gap also from the 35-year-olds to 50-year-olds. These are all women that still need employment, and language is not their barrier. But they're lost as well in that gap. There's the streams that are coming out for young people, 16 to 19, 16 to 21, 16 to 24. So what's happening to all of these people that are still lost within the statistics?
Mm-hmm. I think some of these themes, Trishna, will be explored later on in our session, and I'm sure that there'll be more getting added to thoughts of what more we can ask. Dilraj.
Thank you, Convener. I echo with some of the points that Sarabjit and Trishna have raised. I would like to expand on a couple of those points. Research indicates there's a loss of significant talent between the ages of 14 and 22. And if you kind of tie that with the aspirations of young school-going women, young girls, what we see is that the industries or the sectors which women or young girls express an interest to work in, that interest doesn't get kind of worked on across their adult lives. And I think that's a very interesting area in terms of how targeted intervention should be provided to women with specific career aspirations. So you're talking streams like journalism, media, medicine and laws, and this is something like broad brush. They're very gender focused on certain male stereotypes, certain kind of rhetoric going on, not only at the senior levels, but even at entry levels. So there are young women who do have these aspirations, but those aspirations don't get fleshed out. Secondly, what we've seen is, I know when we talk about career choices, they don't necessarily kind of come hand in hand, but occupational segregation. So it's kind of what Trishna highlighted. When you are engaging with career guidance in schools, they say, this is not for you, this is not for you. And I think it has an intersectional element, no doubt, but it's actually a gender element as well. I have spoken to my peers who are not necessarily from the minority ethnic background, but they do say that they were advised to go into nursing, or they were advised to go into teaching, and you're smiling, which kind of, I think this needs to be also considered when we are talking about career guidance to young women in schools. That then has an impact on their choices, because you'll see they go on to kind of primarily teaching, healthcare, or caring roles, which necessarily are not high paying. They're 0-hour contracts. So they might be employable, but they're not employed. Research also indicates, and in our experience as well, what we've seen is the interventions we are talking about is supporting women's building confidence. Yes, that's absolutely necessary, giving them the skills, but the market is not supporting that supply. So on the demand side, you've got employers who still do not kind of consider, or not aware, or not sensitive to not only needs of BME candidates, but BME women candidates, which then have a there's a whole layered kind of approach to that. So I think, yes, there is a big drop in numbers, and that gap, as they have had, I don't want to go over the issues they've identified. They are absolutely valid. But when we are talking about support to these women, we need to look at it in the context of what are their needs within the communities they are from as women, and not just as BME candidates, but as BME women, which then highlights the whole intersectional issue of women's needs in these spaces. Thank you.
Viana.
In terms of what we're talking about here, part of our work with AI is actually working with employers, and we're working in terms of, employers are talking about increasing diversity, and a lot of what we're talking about here is coming to the table, that there is no representation for women. We don't see that. We see, yes, there's an increase, but how are we going to show a young women how do you get into these jobs? Which is what we are currently doing with Prespect, is working on that information. There is a lack of information. There's a lack of access to route into work. That is not just you go into school, you go into college and university, and that's it. There are other routes into work that we don't talk about, that we don't share with BME women. And again, with that label of it being BME, we're not looking at individual cultures to understand the various issues in terms of how do parents support young people to find the routes. We were just talking about apprenticeship here. Again, in terms of apprenticeship, when you see the advertising of it, you tend to focus more on male, the type of works that they get into. So again, it's that lack of information that I feel we don't have enough for BME women.
I've left Fergus McMillan to the end. Fergus, you do work in a government-funded agency that is charged with dealing with some of these issues. Can you update us on some of that work?
Certainly, yes, and thanks for the opportunity to come to talk to you all today. I think what I would say is very much kind of feeds on from what Viana was saying about other routes, I suppose, in particular to talk about the apprenticeship programmes in Scotland, but also to talk about careers guidance, because that has come up from other members of the panel. Skills Development Scotland has an equality action plan for both of those areas of work, an action plan for apprenticeships, but also one for careers information, advice and guidance, which comes from the starting point of recognising the issues that the panel has talked about today. The Modern Apprenticeship Programme has very specific targets in this area that come from developing the young workforce. The target around BME participation in the Modern Apprenticeship Programme is to reach the population share, and we are absolutely not there yet. However, there has been some progress over the last few years, though that progress has definitely been slower than we would have liked. In 2018-19, 2.3% of the modern apprenticeship programme starts were from a BME background, and that's or community, and that's risen from about 1.5 4 or 5 years before that. There are two other programmes that you might be aware of under the Apprenticeship Family: Foundation Apprenticeships, which are delivered in schools, and graduate apprenticeships at universities. Both of those programmes are much younger in terms of their development than the modern apprenticeship programme. The data is encouraging for ethnic minority groups in the Foundation Apprenticeship programme, although the numbers are small at this stage, so it's perhaps a bit early to make assumptions about the performance of that programme in relation to BME population. But the statistic there for the most recent cohort was 6.1% of the overall Foundation Apprenticeship programme. And again, graduate apprenticeship programme is performing slightly better, but not quite at that population share. But I think what we see at Skills Development Scotland is the potential for the apprenticeship programme to act as a pathway, both foundation apprenticeships and other employability programmes to act as pathways into modern apprenticeships. And I would just pick up on that point that Viana made, which I think was an important one, about BME young people and their families seeing apprenticeships as a valued route into work. I think what we do know is that the statistics around BME young people's performance at school tends to be to do well. Progression into higher education is in higher numbers, but obviously, as everybody's said on the panel, that doesn't translate into good labour market outcomes. And when we look at the attractiveness of apprenticeships or higher education to BME people, there certainly is a tendency to favour higher education over the apprenticeship route. So I'll stop there for now.
Yeah. A quick supplementary from Sarah.
This is for Fergus from the STS. So see your programmes in relation to them, are they broken down into gender?
Yes, they are. Yes, obviously I've focused there talking about the BME statistics, but yeah, they absolutely are. And the target there around the modern apprenticeship programme is that, so the target there looks at occupational segregation that's come up before, and obviously the modern apprenticeship programme reflects wider occupational segregation in employment. The target there is to not have a framework which is basically a group of different occupations that are grouped together, to not have a framework that has a gender balance of 75-25% or worse. So that's in either direction, where there's an underrepresentation of women or an underrepresentation of men.
Can I clarify, Fergus? Is the BME figure broken down into gender?
It can be, yes. I don't.
Right,
yes, it can be,
yeah.
yes, yeah.
Because I think
in terms
that
of,
would be useful in terms of this.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So in terms of an intersectional figure, yeah,
it can be. That's good. I know that the panel could all say more, but excuse me, we do have to move on. That's been a really good outline. Definitely. Is there anything you would like to sweep up on that, Sarah, before we move on? Are you happy with what you've heard?
No, definitely. I think
So
it's
laying
been a
the
great
groundwork.
rebalance and insights into the main issues.
Good.
For minority ethnic
Okay.
women.
Now, Nagar Ibrahim has a question.
Thank you, convener. Hello, panel. How are women from ethnic minority backgrounds supported into employment by SDS, by government policies, by third sector organisations, and also school careers advice sectors?
Okay. Sarvjit.
SEMVO Scotland currently has a project called Empowering Women. As part of that project, it's actually a programme, we have two projects underneath that. One being the employability project, and the other one being confidence and well-being. Now, this is very, very important that we have these two projects working hand in hand. The employability project is a very linear project in that there's a process. We help young women into helping them, having a look to see what suits them, what role suits them, then job searching, then filling in or completing a CV, looking at their transferable skills, then filling in application forms, looking at skills, filling in competency-based application forms and competency-based interview skills, doing mock interviews. So that's quite a linear process. However, one of the key things I think that's very important, I think Dilraj touched on it slightly earlier, was the fact that that's just simply not enough sometimes. The confidence aspect is very much paramount to make sure that the young women are supported in their job searches, in the variety of job searches, and also increasing their self-esteem, their self-awareness and their self-confidence. And we run, in the Confidence and Wellbeing project, we run the Pacific Institute's Steps to Excellence programme, and I don't know if anybody around the table has heard of that programme. It's a worldwide, world-known American-based programme that we do to build women's confidence. So that's one of the things that SEMVO Scotland are doing currently. Previously, we had ran the Young, Confident and Connected programme, which was a fabulous programme. And unfortunately, one of the things that I would say is that these programmes can only be sometimes funded from year to year, which is such it's a crying shame, because there's such great work being done both with employers, with mainstream organisations, with organisations like the ones around the table here today. And it's such a shame that we only have 1 year's funding to carry out these programmes. And if you're lucky, you get a second year. And if you're really lucky, you get a third year. But it's the funding aspect that kind of is a downfall, unfortunately, in these programmes.
Okay, I have Trishna and then Dilraj.
Similar to what Sarvjit's saying, for the past 25 years, we have been running programmes like that. And again, it's like 1 year funding, 2 year funding. At one point, we had 4 years funding. And that linked in with our social enterprise community cafe, where we had about at least 100 women going through that programme. And they all came out on the other end, either in the hospitality sector or moved on into further education or higher education. But it was very much hand-holding, it was the confidence building, it was making them see that they had value in themselves, that they had something to offer to the economy of Scotland. But it was working in close partnership with people, organisations. And we have worked for a very, very long time with Skills Development Scotland in all its different forms. And last year we put 6 women through an SQA in hospitality, and that was working in partnership with Skills Development Scotland and looking at their modern apprenticeship sort of assessments and their skills and their modules. But then the only thing that happens is that one thing, this was it was a very successful model, and we wanted to run the similar model in youth work, in community development work, but then it just fizzles out, and you don't have that that continuation of something that has worked really well and is a really good model. And it was looking at the modules within the modern apprenticeship to see how we could maybe tweak them a bit to fit in with the way that these women, where they were coming from. And yet we still, we just feel that that's where things fall down. And then the statistics will show that there was so much input from the BME community. And then it's not a one-size-fits-all. We work with a very settled migrant community of women. We work with women that are first, second, third, fourth generation born and brought up in Scotland. And they don't see themselves as BME. But they're labelled like that, and now we have to use that word. We didn't know we were BME until somebody told us.
See, before I move on to Dilraj, I think there's been something interesting opened up there, Nagar, which ties in with government policy. So if between Fergus, McMillan and Trishna Singh, you could maybe explore some of that about how, for example, short-term programmes that seem to be working really well, and then all of a sudden they just stop because some other sparkly new policy turns up that's supposed to solve all the issues. So would you like to respond, Fergus?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I think what strikes me is that there are a range of programmes that are offered by different organisations in the third sector, in the private sector, I think often for equality groups, including the group that we're talking about here, though that stage is particularly important, particularly in accessing apprenticeship programmes, but other opportunities as well. And I think there is an opportunity for us to work more closely together and as people on the panel have said, for there to be greater continuity year on year, I suppose, around those supported programmes and kind of consistency of approach. I suppose the other organisation that we've not mentioned so far is Developing the Young Workforce, which has a real role in engaging employers in work with schools, but also in terms of the programmes that we're talking about here. And I think what we've seen in terms of what works is where all of those partners are involved in the design of programmes at the beginning. So where community organisations, developing the young workforce, bringing the employers in, where they're all involved in the design and delivery of programmes, that's where we see the most effective programmes, because we've got to kind of, I suppose, have an aim in mind for the programme itself, you know, and the availability of jobs at the end of particular programmes. So, yeah, I think there's an opportunity there for greater consistency in our approach.
Okay, before I move on to Dilraj, Nagar, do you have any comments about what you've heard so far?
I was wondering if the impact of any of these programs was measured, and then investing the government funding was based on the impact.
So currently with Pre-Spect, our programme is got a unique funding. So we're funded by the Scottish Government and the Hunters Foundation. It's called the SIP Fund. And the way the fund works is very much flexible in how we work. So we adapt our programme to the needs of, say, the group that come to us. And the impact that we've had is we're working with people who've been out of work. We work with mature BME women who've been out of work for up to 10 years, and we've managed to get people into investment banking career, as opposed to, well, removing a person from care work. She had a master's degree, and getting her into a proper job that she wanted to do, but that went into working in the barriers. And looking at the barriers from external barriers, but also working on the personal barriers that we don't always think about, what's also holding us back. And just reporting on this. And as we've been working on this, we've had people going into really, really good jobs, but it's required us working on empowerment rather than that hand-holding, which we found with a lot of programs, it's holding on to you, whereas we're looking at giving you the tools to do what you can, but we're always here. So it's an agile kind of experience, so you don't feel like you come through to us for 1 year and that's you done. So once a person's in job, we focus on how do you stay in there? You know, what do you do then to get into promotion? How do you, as an individual, make sure that you keep up with your training? If the company doesn't offer you training, what can you do for yourself so that you're always staying up to the next level? And this is reported. So we've been talking to the Scottish Government about how this is working compared to a programme that's focused on helping a person up to a point. We really want to work with a person when they get in a job to make sure that it's sustainable, and it's been working really well so far. So I'm going to be writing a report soon, and I'll share that with the group.
Sarah.
Right, so basically, I understand in regards to funding, some things just aren't manageable, but this is just a question to everyone. So, you know, after programmes, projects or modules have been completed, is there any kind of platform or just something that you're able to see how well these women have done, or how, you know, how much they've actually benefited from each programme?
In the absence of a convener, I guess. You want to go first? Okay. Well, yes, part of the work we do is about the legacy work of the programs we run. And I just wanted to flag this up earlier, that challenge with funding-driven programs, which unfortunately Amina as well, we are at the receiving end of, you know, the trials and tribulations of funding. What happens is you can't really capture impact post-funding ends. Part of the engagement with our beneficiaries is that we encourage them to keep in touch with us, and sometimes they come back to the organization to work with the organization, or sometimes they create their network. So yes, we do empower them to be able to communicate how that's made a difference, but it's not necessarily a very ongoing process.
It's an ongoing process because we have those services like for employability, CV building, confidence building as part of a drop-in. So every week people have that space to come in and use that facility. And we follow up with women because then they will, once they've moved and we've let go of the hand-holding and they are actually in a job, if they need more support to move forward, then they will always come back. So in that way, we are keeping in touch, and because similar to what Dora said, they either come back and maybe look for a job within our organisation, or maybe in the third sector where they might think that I would never think of applying to that. So there is that continuity of keeping in touch with women and them also feeding back to us to how well they've progressed. But we also look at the ripple effect it has, because we've worked with women who from internal cultural barriers have actually been the first ones in their family to take this step and push the barriers and have a mainstream job. And the ripple effect of that is that then they are now encouraging and supporting their daughters and daughter-in-laws to go into further education, higher education, and go past all the other barriers that they had for many years. So there is that. I just wanted to, I know it's slightly different, but the foundation that you mentioned in the schools, does that apply to all schools, or is it certain schools that take it up?
Fergus, you wanted to come in anyway, so if you can respond to that and then
yeah,
finish
absolutely.
off this question.
I mean, obviously, take-up is progressing across Scotland, but it has the potential to be in all schools across Scotland, and it has the same components of other work-based learning programmes. So that would be about a recognised qualification that can be up to higher level, that would be delivered by a learning provider or a college, but also that experience of real work with an employer at the same time. So yeah, that's got the potential to be in schools across Scotland. And you know, I think it's being seen, you know, again, it's about the perceptions of the value of foundation apprenticeships alongside other more formal qualifications. What I just wanted to add in response to the question was one thing in particular, Skills Development Scotland, you know, in terms of that question about piloting things and then, you know, and kind of shorter term timescales. We have a pilot of a small piece of funding that's attached to the Modern Apprenticeship Programme at the moment, which is, doesn't roll off the tongue, called the Ethnic Intersectionality Initiative. And that initiative is about combining people from an ethnic minority with another protected characteristic or issue that somebody might need support around. And in terms of impact, we've seen at the moment...
Fergus, I'm sorry, could you tell me what that means?
So which part of that, sorry?
You know, what you were saying about pairing somebody with another protected characteristic.
So I suppose the point of the fund is that it's intersectional. So it's about, first of all, people from an ethnic minority background with one other protected characteristic. So in this case, that might be women or young women, or it might be another reason that people might need support. So that might be around childcare, for example, or their length of time away from the labour market. So it's two factors. I know it perhaps sounds like we're putting people into boxes, but it is to address intersectionality. It's a small fund as part of the Modern Apprenticeship Programme, but it is certainly in this year being it's had a high take-up and is almost oversubscribed. So I think there's something there for us to look at in terms of, okay, if there's a real demand for this, then what are we doing about either mainstreaming that into the programme going forward or continuing it in some way or another. I suppose I also wanted to mention the Careers Information Advice and Guidance Service that is a universal service but does have methods that are integrated as part of it, which is about identifying particular needs and challenging stereotypes. So staff across Scotland are increasingly upskilled about challenging traditional destinations for women and for BME people and as part of that universal service and as part of that practice. And obviously the final point is that Skills Development Scotland do also partner with a range of community organisations, some of them around the table here, in order to support specific projects. And at the moment, what we're trying to do is really getting to that question that you asked about impact in terms of what's working here, so what do we continue and what perhaps hasn't worked so well.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm very aware that... Oh, sorry, Dilraj, did you never get in? You've been sitting all that time. Sorry, carry on.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to come back to your query. At Armina, we've done this in the past, and unfortunately funding is limited at the moment, but part of the engagement with young women and women per se is about identifying where they feel they are in their employment journey. Now, when we talk employability, the end goal sometimes for some women, depending on where they are in their life in terms of skills and confidence, is not getting a job. It could just be about accessing volunteering opportunities or coming into the office. And I think even with women under 30, if they address themselves as first-generation migrants or overseas new migrants, what we tend to see is that there's a marked difference in capacity and skills and confidence. So the support these women need has to be multi-tiered and it's quite resource intensive. We can't all expect young graduate women to be in the same space as women who need a lot more support to come to the point where they're sharing those spaces. I think one of the challenges, which I don't know if we'll be touching upon that later on, is when we speak about confidence, there's different sorts of confidence. There's confidence about being able to engage with women from similar backgrounds, and I think that isn't so much of a challenge. The challenge is being able to engage in diverse spaces, and there is a lot of potential to work in that area. I think we still have a lot to do. So, yeah, my thoughts on that.
Right, I have a quick supplementary from Miriam.
Just a quick question on some of the comments made earlier on when you were answering. Are you able to explain a little bit more detail or perhaps the barriers faced by young women over the labelling of BME?
I know this is a huge issue, but can I have a very quick response, because I'm aware of the time, from one person perhaps, and we can explore that theme later on.
My experience, I think people just don't realise the impact that has on young women. In fact, not just young women, young people from the BME community. It's actually horrendous. And I think if anybody wants to do any impact to find that, that should be a huge piece of research, because that whole title, BME, is just horrible. It's actually disgusting. It disgusts me. I hate the fact that people... I'm 67. I was born and brought up here. How dare anybody put me in that box as a BME? And when I think about my children and my grandchildren, and I think that's disgraceful. They don't even relate to that. And then we have all these newfangled things coming up. BAME, Black and Asian minority ethnic. Who creates these? Certainly not the black people themselves. And this, sorry, I'm not being offensive or anything like that, but this ethnic intersectionality. I mean, where do these buzzwords come from? You know, and that needs to go out there, and people need to be not afraid of saying it out loud. Everybody's too scared to say it out loud because they don't want to offend anybody, or they don't want to offend their best buddy who might be their local MSP or whatever. And don't call me that. I'm a person.
Now, hold on. I'm very aware that everybody wants to say something. Is there anybody disagreeing? Not justifying, but disagreeing? No.
No, but I'd like to add to it.
Very, very quickly.
Very brief. Very brief, promise you. I think the biggest impact is that the effort that needs to be then put in by that particular individual becomes a lot more, because they just don't want to be classed as a BME, and they don't want to be treated as BME. They want to be known for the skills they're bringing. They want to be known for the experience they have. They want to be known for who they are. And I'm a BME woman. I was young at one point. And I think there's a kind of whole issue of putting them in a box and then not seeing them in any other space. That's...
Okay, no, Fergus, I know you want to justify it, but we will ask the government to justify it, and there are all sorts of justifications that will be put forward, and it's a huge question. Now, I'm going to be Mrs. Nasty Chairperson, because We have set the theme very, very well, and I'm speaking to all participants here. And we have lots of other questions we want to get through. So I'm going to ask our committee members to ask their question, but say who they would like to respond to it, because I do want to get through all of this. And I'll go first of all to Noor.
A lot of pressure just there to pick one of you. So I guess my question would maybe be to Fergus then. What is not working between school, college or arrival in Scotland and employment, and why do you think that is?
Sorry, could I ask you to repeat that question?
Yes,
just didn't hear the end.
What is not working between school, college or arrival in Scotland and employment? Why do you think that is?
Fergus.
It's not working. I mean, I think that there is definitely something about some of the issues that have been mentioned so far, that we are putting parts of the population into boxes and that programmes are short-term and sometimes difficult to manage in terms of to evaluate in terms of the impact. I think that we need to sometimes dig beneath the statistics, although I've talked about some of the statistics today, and find out what's actually going on with people themselves, like today's exercise. I think that's particularly valuable. I think we need to, in equality and diversity terms in recruitment and employment, not hide behind programmes that are perhaps a bit more palatable, like training on unconscious bias. At a personal level, I think that unconscious bias programmes might work where there's a clear disparity in terms of applicants and their suitability for a job, but actually when it comes to people who are perhaps on a level playing field, then actually what you're talking about is unconscious bias training perhaps doesn't prepare people for that. I think we need to go further in terms of, some people are obviously introducing anonymised applications, but we need to go further than that and think about the makeup of panels and whether or not they have representation from communities on them. I think those are things that will start to change things in practice. And I think, going back to the point that's just been made, having these kind of conversations that are sometimes quite difficult need to absolutely be had, and that includes the existence of prejudice and discrimination that absolutely exists. And for Skills Development Scotland, I suppose an important part of that is about, we are trying to be more representative in our marketing campaigns, for example. We are involving people from particular communities in the development of those campaigns, but there's a lot more that we could do.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to jump about a wee bit from themes that are coming out here. And we talked there about transition to different things. So I think we'll go to Madia, because she wants to talk about something, very basic.
Thank you, convener, and welcome panel. I think my question will go to Fergus. What are you doing to address racism, discrimination, and lack of cultural awareness in schools and careers information and guidance programs? I know some of the others mentioned some already that they do. And what measures are you taking to ensure that these are working?
I'm going to bring in Oreo here as well, because I know she wanted to talk on a similar theme.
I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity. So basically, I just wanted to ask a question on, is there any program going on for teachers and guidance at school based on discrimination and racism to help students in schools based on their confidence? Because I know some students get discouraged by teachers and guidance based on what they want to do in future in college or uni. Do you know if there's any program for that?
Okay, I think these are very much linked. So I know we've gone to Fergus, but I'm sure there's someone else in the panel that would have a very firm view on it. So please indicate to me if you... All of you? Fergus, if you could set the scene, please, quickly.
Okay, so quickly then, I suppose what I can talk about is in relation to careers advice and guidance. So there is a careers advisor in every school, every secondary school across Scotland. And part of their professional development is absolutely about equality and diversity, and that includes upskilling and training around equality characteristics, and ethnicity is a central part of that. There is a project to mention to you that Education Scotland run. Obviously, I'm not here to talk necessarily on behalf of schools directly, but called the Improving Gender Balance Project. And I know that they do work in, sorry to use the term, but in an intersectional way, and they do look at ethnicity. That programme is about upskilling teachers around careers choice and particularly stereotypes within that. So perhaps there is an opportunity for that programme to do more in relation to ethnicity and young women, young BME women. Sorry to use the phrase.
Fergus, we'll just take it. There's a blanket apology. You don't have to apologise.
Okay. So apologies for everything. Remind me, sorry, of the second part of your question. I don't think I've answered that part.
What measures are put in place to ensure that what you're doing is working?
Okay, well, I suppose the measures, I've talked about them in relation to the apprenticeship family and the modern apprenticeship programme in particular, and that is very much about, it's a statistical look at the stats in terms of the starts on these programmes from particular communities. And the work that we do in relation to the careers service is that there are surveys that Skills Development Scotland run on a regular basis. Young People in Scotland survey has very specific questions about ethnicity and gender in there, and the results of that most recent survey are almost ready to be released. There's also a senior phase survey which talks about the impact of careers guidance, and again that has equality characteristics as well. So that's to measure the impact and the effectiveness of the careers service in schools.
Okay, I'm going to go to Vienna as well, and perhaps look too at the potential for further training for teachers.
Mm-hmm. Currently, our programme is going to be going to GCU to work with them on their career development. They've got a career fair coming up. I got an email inviting us to work with the label BME students to support them in terms of their career. And what we want to start doing is actually going into schools. I've got a few younger cousins who are in school at the moment who are having these conversations where they feel that they're not given advice in terms of what they're going to do after this. So, yeah, we'll be bringing in programs that you see that representation. You know, you can ask us questions that you wouldn't otherwise ask advisors in your schools. So we're looking to bring it in to schools now.
I think one of the things about training for teachers is that it only happens at certain points of time. So if you go into a school to do cultural awareness training with some schools, it depends on the headmaster or the headmistress of that school and what they deem as appropriate for their staff to take up on. And that would consist of one training on diversity and culture. And the schools that we've worked with, where we've did the softer kind of cultural awareness, where they learn about the culture of a community rather than what the law says, those 2 hours teachers have found the most informative to help them to work with the young people that they're supporting. But that doesn't happen. You have one school that will approach us and it will happen, and then for the next 5 years you don't hear anything. So these are the kind of things that need to be built into the schools and not left to the headmasters or the headmistresses to decide, all right, okay, well, we'll put that into the training for this year. And that's where it breaks down, because it depends on the person. The law can say whatever it likes and put it out there, but if the person that's supposed to be working towards that law doesn't like the idea, it won't be implemented. And that's sadly why we're at this stage in Scotland still talking about these issues, and these things are still happening in our schools.
Okay, now that's leading on to policy and practice. I'm going to go to Miriam before I come to anyone else.
Rina, perhaps this will be aimed at Sarbjet. What positive changes to practice, policy and awareness have become evident in Scotland over the past 5 years? Are there any good international comparisons or examples from elsewhere in the UK?
And this is for employers and the workplace?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or generally, I would say, you know, could also address the schools issue too, because there's obviously an issue there. So,
okay, could you repeat that question again then in that case? Because I was
and I think I'll come to Doraj after that as well.
Yeah. What positive changes to practice, policy and awareness have become evident in Scotland over the past 5 years? Are there any good international comparisons or examples from elsewhere in the UK?
Yeah, okay. So the official response to that is that there are, when we're talking about workplaces, there are examples of diversity networks, staff training, harassment policies in many workplaces. There's a lot of them out there. Most employers will have these in place. However, based on Assemble Scotland's experience, for any diversity or strategy or policy to be effective, it has to start from the top of the organisation and then work its way down. And it's only meaningful if it's embedded in the whole organisation. Now, whether that's within the employment sector or whether it's in the education sector or whether it's within any other sector. So these policies that are out there, they're great written down on paper. They're absolutely fabulous. However, more needs to be done to see that they're monitored, that there is a base level data that's available to say that this is where we started and this is where we are now. So there are policies in place. There's policies in place for harassment. However, even when such policies are in place, how many victims are actually coming to the forefront with the fear of victimisation if they do come to the forefront? So, yes, these things are in place. There are some great organisations out there doing some good practice. We've got our own organisation does some mainstreaming support. And what we do is we go out and we do what's called an equality impact assessment, which looks at their policies and sees if the policies are actually relevant to what's actually going on in the ground. So a lot of organisations on paper, they look great, but the problem is, are they actually effectively delivering these policies? To give you some examples, we do have, say for example, we've recently worked with the Scottish Court Service to work with some of their policies, and I think Trishna's organisation also were there when we did the Sikh Kirpan work that we did with the Court Service. So yes, there are some great policies in place that are out there within mainstream organisations, but it's actually is it live? Is it working? Are the boards and the management, top management, are they actually working to those policies?
Dilraj, we've heard of how policies can be good, but they have to be monitored. Do you know of any good examples that would encompass some of that, either in the UK or beyond?
I am aware of a good example which I can say can be extrapolated, but it's not in the context of equalities and diversity. I just came across this rank funding. I don't know if anybody's heard of Rank Fund, and I thought it was a very interesting program they're running. It's a program called Time to Shine internship, where they are looking to work with a range of beneficiaries over a long period of time. And I think that's a very interesting model which can be kind of brought into our workplace internship and placements program. In terms of what's working, I'd say there's a general awareness and recognition that employers need to be inclusive and diverse. But I would like to just, expand on one of the points which Sarbjeet has read. Whether those policies are actually being implemented is the question. So it's how do you measure a policy, whether a policy is effective? Are you measuring whether it's being understood by employers? Yes. As in, I've actually seen governance papers where organizations talk, we can't do anything about BME representation because this is a wider sectoral issue. So attributing the whole challenge of engaging with BME women and communities then gets pushed to the wider kind of rhetoric. A good example would be CJS. I know it's, Community Jobs Scotland. I know it's quite third sector focused, but I think that's a very good initiative of encouraging young people to, and for us as young women, into employability. That's a good model.
Right. Before I go on to Viana, I have a very specific question that will be much of interest to her, and both can be addressed, and that's from Aya Sophia.
Thank you, Convener. So what examples of best practice are there in Scotland to encourage recruitment, retention and development of minority ethnic women, such as mentoring schemes and leadership programmes?
Viana.
Respond in terms of measuring this. So with AI employability, we've recently run a diversity work programme, which brought BME women and employers into a room in Edinburgh and Glasgow, where we were able to share experiences in terms from recruitment, advertising, all the way into the job. So right now, the next phase of it is that some of these employers have jobs available, which some of the women are now applying for and going through the routes of, we support them with their CVs. And then once they're in, we're going to then measure the impact of how diversity in the workplace have changed the policy, how that's possibly changed the recruitment processes, how that then, how that person is included in, the growth of them in the company. And talking about mentorship, that's something that we focus in here, is that we encourage people to make that connection. So when we're talking about confidence, we don't really do enough of that networking where we meet people and we ask for mentorship within the field that we want to do, which is what other people do to get into work. And that is something that we really put into practice with Prospect, is to, as you are in education or learning or anything, it's okay to, connect with somebody on LinkedIn, but we're not told to do these things. We're not given advice to do these things. And in that advice of how do you then make that contact? Yes, mentorship, networking is the route into work, but we're not given that advice. I wouldn't have known this without doing Prospect. And that kind of is something that, you could probably practice with in terms of the job that we do. But yeah.
Okay, so once people are in the workplace, there are barriers to face there, and there are issues around that. So I think we'll go on to Rabia for her question.
Thank you, Convener. So I'd like to ask, what is happening to address racism and discrimination in the workplace, such as diversity networks, cultural awareness, flexible working, harassment policies, and so on? And I'd like to ask this question to Fergus, and I think also Viana as well. Thank you.
So one thing at a kind of practical level I wanted to say was the Modern Apprenticeship Programme obviously is Skills Development Scotland contracts with learning providers to deliver the Modern Apprenticeship Programme in the main, and that might include private training providers or colleges. So there's often an indirect relationship between Skills Development Scotland and employers, although sometimes there's a direct relationship where that's easier to kind of influence good practice around the issues that you've raised. The team at SDS has, and I put this in the formal submission, developed a guide around engaging with BME communities that has got lots of examples of good practice that learning providers can work with employers to encourage them to use. So that's one thing. I suppose other examples include the projects that Skills Development Scotland are commissioning with community organisations to build people's understanding of the issues. And we also run CPD events, and those CPD events are for employers and learning providers again, in terms of some of the more practical things, both awareness but also practical things that they can put in place to address some of the issues.
Okay, Fiona.
Could you just repeat the question for me again, please?
Yeah, sure. So what is happening to address racism and discrimination in the workplace, such as diversity networks, cultural awareness, flexible working and harassment policies?
Okay. In terms of what we're doing with this diversity work programme, we've put in, especially with flexible working, we've encouraged employers to look into how, when you're approaching BME women, especially returners, how do we make it possible that people can come in for interviews, for example? And then once a person is in work, we look into how you are inclusive in terms of how do you engage a person, encourage them to be a part of the culture, and also how do you report an issue so it doesn't become that if you're the only person in the company and you're experiencing something, you don't become the only one who noticed. So being aware of your culture and how that could impact a person who is the only one in the group. And having these conversations with employers has helped them, and having people in the job has helped them to see that there's quite a lot of pressure in individuals to speak up. There's a lot of pressure to think under the banner of BME. And what having the women and employers in the room has meant that we were able to share, for example, employers were asking, do we need to have a special process for you? And that is something that a lot of people said no, because then you're bringing that attention on a person. So if you have a BME person coming into your workplace and suddenly you're creating all these new processes for them, that is an instant alarm bells. You know, that is an instant target on a person if you haven't had that conversation with the whole company. And like you were saying, it has to come from the top right through. So if you're having diversity or unconscious bias training, it shouldn't be something that is just a one-day thing, because it's not going to change overnight. It's something that needs to, you know, it's a constant thing. And we were having a conversation yesterday with an employer where we gave the suggestion of it becoming a topic, a forum, that where you're discussing things and everybody gets to put in issues. So it's not just every time we have a forum, is that one BME person talking about an issue. You know, so yeah, there's loads of little examples in terms of the employers that we're working with, and they've been honest in their processes. They've been honest in that some have said, yes, we've got diversity right and it's working, but through this workshop, through this session, they've been able to flag up areas that haven't actually been working. So part of us being there, we're able to support them into the next phase.
Oriel, you had an interest in this as well. If we could have a quick supplementary.
Sorry. Thank you for the opportunity. So basically, I just wanted to, do you know if, based on workplaces, do you think there should be program for new people coming based on maybe from different race to let them know the type, to let them know how to deal with the cultural awareness in workplaces? How do they deal with such thing? Do they need to like open up about it, or do they need to just talk about it to just the head of the company or just people around them?
Fiona.
Some of the suggestions that the women in the group were talking about, celebrating cultures. When you think of it from a celebration rather than the elephant in the room conversation, it changes that. So one of the organisations there is a startup, so they've already implemented diversity and inclusion, so it's embedded in their culture, where they have, celebration of, for example, somebody from Sri Lanka, so we have their foods. And that's something that we spoke to employers, that including it as a celebration where you can have that conversation with people, so it doesn't become that, coffee room chat where somebody's coming up to you, where are you from, or where you're really, really from. It breaks that ice. So I think if we get that into it being a celebration, not being a label thing, not being a fear thing, I think it also takes that pressure off employers, because they have that same fear. How do we interact with people from different backgrounds? It's like, how would you like to be interacted? It's about that respect. But yeah.
Now, before everyone's going to get a chance to respond to this next question, so if you're really smart, you can answer that one too. But I don't want it to take too long, because it's very important we get on to the role of government and funding and things, and I don't want to be skimping on that. So before we do that, can I go to Revati?
My question for the panel is, are there any specific actions that your organisations could be doing to improve the outcomes for ethnic minority women once they enter into the workplace?
Keeping in touch with people and they're coming back to you, then you're always there to offer that support and help them to move in. And by us, our organisations representing women on major places like there's the National Advisory Council for BME Women that feeds into the First Minister's report. So being on something like that and raising all of these things, because a lot of people look at policy and everything, some of the simpler things are easiest, like what you're saying about cultural awareness. Now, the lived experience of cultural awareness is far more better to inform employers and other people about what it is to be, but it shouldn't always be the one-way thing. It's always about, what about your food? What about your culture? But then what about the Scottish culture? You know, there are so many different facets to it. And yet it's always a one-way thing. You bring in your curry, you bring in your pakoras. But don't, you know, somebody think about it, but actually I like haggis. You know, so there's that kind of two-way conversation that needs to start happening more, rather than just being the focus on the one person that's coming out. But as the support is there, if people come back and we keep that link up with them, and we're there representing them at places where it matters now, rather than just at the grassroots level. But it needs to reach the top.
Dilraj.
There's 3 points I'd like to raise. First is progression routes to progression. So what we could be doing and what we are not doing, because it's funding driven, so it's in response to the next question, is we would like to support women to progress, not just get a job, because that's actually what Viana mentioned earlier, is the start of the journey. And what we found is a number of women are in those same roles, in low-paid roles, or they're really lower in the organization. So yes, we could be supporting women across those progression routes. What we have been doing is we've been working with mainstream organizations who, in the creative sector, as an example, where you wouldn't think BME women engaging with the creative arts. It's like two very polar opposites, or perceived to be, and we partnered with them and created cohorts of working with women on a 6 to 7 women cohort, working across the program and working towards getting them into the employment market. So yeah, that's the sort of model I think would be quite effective.
Okay, Cedric, your organisation is an umbrella organisation. So what do you think your organisation could do in this regard?
And some of the stuff that we've actually already started is women that are already in employment, getting them onto boards of the organisation, and we're promoting and supporting women to be in the management team, or if not, then at least volunteer to be on the board of organisations.
Thank you. Before I go to Fergus and Viana, I think Revati has an addition to her question.
I mean, Fergus and Viana could probably answer this as well, but I'm curious in all the different actions and programs that you run, do you look at how that might affect all the groups within BME? I mean, I think someone mentioned before that that's quite an umbrella term, but looking at what individual things you need to do for Black women, or for East Asian women, or for South Asian women, if that makes sense.
Sargit?
I would like to say that when I first started talking right at the beginning of this session, I was keen that women weren't stereotyped. The kind of service that we offer is tailored to that individual woman or young person. And I think that's so important, because every single individual is an individual, and even from the same backgrounds, one woman may have mental health issues, one young person might have debt issues. So it's not just groups of women, it's individuals within those groups, and it's so important. I've supported all kinds of young people and young women, and you could have two women sitting looking very similar from a same cultural background, but their issues can be so very different.
Very quickly, please, Trishna, I'm aware of the time.
Just to say that when we were talking about the hand-holding, that's where that comes back. It's not that kind of hand-holding that we're holding your hand all the time, but it's how the individual feels. And we work with, although we primarily work with Sikh women, we've worked with women from ethnic communities from across the board, and it is the individual. People just need to get away from that one-size-fits-all.
Fergus, actions your organisation could take.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I just wanted to give one very specific action and also, if I may, convener, a kind of offer to Young Women Lead. The action, I suppose, is, and it would be wrong of me not to mention this, next week is Scottish Apprenticeship Week. And obviously we've talked today about the issues in relation to diversity in apprenticeships. And the theme for Apprenticeship Week is talent without limits. So the idea there, very much coming on from that bit about coming from celebrating the achievements of people from different groups, will be that case studies of diverse groups of people in apprenticeships will be displayed and put out through our social media. So I'd encourage you to have a look for that hashtag talent without limits, because that's an opportunity to demonstrate the diversity, I suppose, of apprenticeships, and that apprenticeships are for everyone. That's one action. Similar to other people on the panel, we have a youth board at Skills Development Scotland. Again, we're looking at the diversity on that youth board, and that is about, I suppose, that kind of shadow board idea that bigger organisations are thinking about in relation to increasing diversity that might be of interest. And I suppose the offer was, I've not mentioned so far, Scottish Apprenticeship Advisory Board, who are responsible for the governance around apprenticeships in Scotland, established a gender commission at the tail end of last year. And that gender commission is absolutely to look at the underrepresentation of women in apprenticeships, and more specifically what employers and companies can practically do to address diversity. And I know that the chair of the gender commission would be absolutely open to perhaps a joint meeting of Young Women Lead with members of the Gender Commission, if that was something that you were interested in, and perhaps in particular to explore the representation of ethnic minority young women.
Who is the chair, Fergus?
Natalie Buxton from Weber Shandwick. But I can certainly facilitate that happening if it was something of interest.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure it will be of interest and we can discuss that later. Viana, would you like to quickly round us up on this subject?
And in terms of making sure that people are in work, so our main focus is that. So we worked a lot in getting people into work, but we also focus on the aftercare. And we encourage building of networks and building into mentorship. So when you're in, work on supporting somebody else who's coming up after you, because that also helps you with your confidence, and it helps people to start thinking about getting ahead. And something that we notice, forgot to mention, is a lot of the times with a lot of the BME women that we work with is that need for authority figure to tell them what to do next. So a lot of the times we work on that empowerment of you making that decision. So whatever you do is your decision. Even when you come to us, every stage that you take is a decision that you make yourself, and we support you in that area. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, a very important element in all of this is, of course, government, whether it be local government, Scottish Government, UK Government. Here we are in Scotland. So I have two questions that I'm going to ask the girls to do together for responses from the panel. So first of all, Lauren, and then Rita. Lauren.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, panelists. So because it's about the government, please feel free to be brutally honest. And I'm directing this mostly towards Surbjit and Viana. So how well has the Scottish Government responded? For example, through things like the Race Equality Action Plan, to the findings of the Equal Opportunities Committee inquiry into removing barriers to employment for ethnic minorities, undertaken in 2015-2016? And why has the change been so slow?
Rita.
So my question is, what further action should the government prioritise to overcome barriers that BME women face in training and accessing employment?
Okay, big questions. Surjit.
Thank you very much for that. The Scottish Government have got something in place that is actually very successful, and I think it could be seen to be, I think one of the panel members, one of the committee members had asked earlier on about good practice. It's a project that they're doing with regards to getting people from ethnic minorities into childcare and early learning. It's an excellent piece of work that's going on just now. They're engaging with a lot of mainstream organisations, third sector organisations, community organisations, and there's a big focus in getting a lot of people from different diverse backgrounds onto this this huge big programme where there's going to be 11,000 new places for young children into childcare. So it has been done before. The Scottish Government are working on things at the moment. I couldn't answer why it's so slow, unfortunately. And I think further action could be taken, but that could be used as a good practice, a good piece of work that's already been done.
Yeah, Fianna?
In terms of the reach and the slowness, what we found with is building up the trust, I think especially in the BME community. If we're breaking down, I'm particularly focusing on working with an African community. In my programme, we're not reaching them as much as we should, so we're having to go in the community itself. Because a lot of the times you find that programmes are quite surface-based, so people have to come to these places, and there's a lack of understanding that if I work in Glasgow, you know, areas that people live in, they can't get to us, they're not going to come to us. They don't know about us, they're not, you know, that advertising and marketing. Mm-hmm. And in terms of government, there's different layers. So in the race disparity, that's with the DWP, which I think is managed by the English government side of it rather than the Scottish. So there's that issue there. I wouldn't be able to give you too much detail. I don't know much about there. So yeah, I think it's that access and then getting in there and that trust from people that these things that are put in place, is it actually working for us? Do we go to these programs? Is it going to get me out of that poverty, which becomes the issue? But there are a lot of, you know, new policies in place that if us, I think as organisation, probably take more control of it rather than expecting it to work for us, it probably maybe could get there quicker.
Interesting. I'm going to leave you till last, Trishna, because I know you'll have plenty to say. Dilraj.
Thank you, Convener. As Viana pointed out, some of the portfolios are devolved, so the Scottish Government has a lot more influence on those areas. I personally, and this is my personal opinion, I feel that when we are looking at intervention and support models for women, early learning childcare is great and it is a success story, yes. But for me, that's representative of the wider issue with BME, women employment, that's occupational segregation. And I think what can be done, and this is a fairly easy model to adapt, is look at sectors where we have women who are highly qualified and are still not getting in opportunities, and look at promoting those women into those sectors where they want to aspire to be. And I think that's where the gap is. I've slightly hinted at progression routes. There's an absence of progression routes, which you've spoken about as well. If there are no senior mentors or senior role models in the industry for women to emulate, how will they progress? So it's a multi-level issue. Yes, we are looking at senior representation in boards, but are we still looking at recruitment at senior levels in organizations for women of, you know, BME origins? And I think that's sort of conversation the Scottish Government can certainly have.
Fergus, I know it's difficult for you to have a go at the government. So can I ask you to concentrate on Rita's question was, what further actions do you think could be taken to speed things up and to prioritise?
I think that it kind of feeds on maybe from the point about progression routes. I think there's an opportunity for the different partners around the table. So that includes Skills Development Scotland, the third sector, developing the young workforce and others to work together to communicate clear pathways to particular groups that we know face particular barriers. And I suppose that also could identify where there are gaps and where pathways don't work perhaps for particular groups, and perhaps then policy can address some of the inconsistencies, because I think certainly at a local level the range of different partners and programmes that are available is huge. So there's in this space, so there's definitely an opportunity, I think, for us to be a bit clearer for equality groups, including BME women, about those clear pathways and how we can improve them.
Before I bring Trishna in, Lauren wants to come back in again.
Yes, thank you. I think Trishna can respond to this because a lot has been said today about how policy doesn't transfer into a real tangible change. And a lot of responses we've gotten are, we need role models, we need understanding within companies, within these bridge organizations. But what can the government feasibly do to drive that kind of role modeling, to drive that kind of change, to maybe not create a policy, but create an engagement plan or what have you?
And Rita.
Also for Trishna, you mentioned earlier that until there are legislations and laws, nothing will ever change. So what do you think could...
Okay, Trishna, if you'd address these, and also, has it been slow? Why has it been slow? What could change?
I'm very straight talking, so I don't use the fancy words that people always hear. But for me, over the years, there have been lots of wonderful initiatives from Scottish Government, and they have been put forward by people who were really, really wanted to make change. Sadly, people move on, and policies change, and then the person that comes in, their mindset might be completely different. So if you look back at the history of the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, and the amount of initiatives that have come out there and been rolled out and have been really, really successful, my biggest question to Scottish Government is why are they not followed on? Why are they then dismantled? And then they're made into a policy and it's left on somebody's shelf to gather dust for 100 years. And then we come back to the same conversations about what are the barriers. And sadly, the one main thing is that if you're not visible, you will not be quoted. Right? So asking women from BME communities to go onto boards in a voluntary capacity demeans what they know and their skills and their expertise and knowledge. We should by now, we should have a seat at the table where the decisions are made, where these policies are made. If you look at the makeup of the equality and diversity teams within a whole range of sectors, you'd be hard pushed to find one black, brown person on them. It's all people, white, middle-class Scottish people on them who have read up about diversity and whatever, but they don't have any lived experience. And then you get told the lived experience is anecdotal. Well, it is the lived experience. I'm not going to put it into an academic paper for you because I'm not an academic. I'm telling you, you put it into the academic paper and present it to the government.
Trishna, I've been very, very aware of this term lived experience lately. I mean, what happens in government and parliament, you get buzz phrases every so often that everybody uses. Lived experience is getting used all the time now. It's getting used in drugs policy. It's getting used in all sorts of health contexts. Has anybody even considered using it in this context?
I'm so frustrated by the fact that for 30 years, that was the first thing that we did as an organisation. They called it Sikh Cultural Awareness. It happened by default. We had social work students on placement who read up about Sikhism, came into our organisation, and they were sent to work with Sikh families. And they came back with a glazed look on their face because what they'd read about Sikhs and Sikhism actually wasn't what they went in to see. So by default, I ended up giving them a blow-by-blow account of what it is to be born and brought up in Scotland and having to live within two cultures your whole life. And it grew. and we were asked to deliver these about cultural awareness sessions to all over. The feedback we got from places like Police Scotland, at Fetties, and a whole range of organisations was that 2 hours of being able to ask any kind of question without offending anybody and not having to listen to what the law says were the most informative and most helpful for their place of work or wherever they were coming from. And just to finish off, is like last year, Buckingham Palace got in touch with us to say that their staff at the Queen's Gallery, because they had this social inclusion project going, and they were looking at why people from ethnic communities or other backgrounds did not access these places like the Queen's Gallery and the arts places and all of that. And they contacted us. And then once they'd met with us, they said, would you deliver a cultural awareness session to our staff? So they invited me down to Buckingham Palace, and I delivered cultural awareness to 60 members, including managers, of the Queen's Gallery staff at Buckingham Palace. And the feedback that we got from them was phenomenal, because then they told Holyrood Palace to do the same. Inside Scottish Government, I have mentioned it and said it to I don't know how many different departments, and nobody ever gets back to you. So the thing is, like, all of these young women sitting around here, they all have different lived experiences. And if they were to go somewhere and actually say to somebody, well, actually, do you know what, this is what it feels like. And somebody might, you know, people take it on better that way. But if you're hammering the law onto people, you know, I have sat through a cultural diversity training workshop just to see what it is that they tell people. So there's a whole room full of white Scottish people being told, somebody going hammer and tongs at them about, oh, you can't say this and you can't say that. And I was there as the only brown person, just as an observer. And when they finished their session, I thought to myself, right, okay, if I didn't feel bad about being white, I wouldn't want to come back to that. And that was me feeling for these people having to listen to that. So there needs to be some sort of real conversation and understanding of what's happening out there. And the policies and everything, the framework that's been recently re-evaluated and everything like that, you look at it and it's all the same questions and it's all the same answers, and there is so much research out there that should be picked up on, gleaned and then put together, and you would have a proper race equality framework.
Well, yeah. It seems strange to go on to another couple of questions after that. However, I do have another couple of questions. I'm aware we're going to run maybe 2 or 3 minutes late, if that's okay with our panel. Can I please go to Samira?
Panel today is, where should investment be best directed in improving the experience of young ethnic minority women entering work? Thank you.
Vienna.
I think start in schools. If you're not getting the information there and then you come out and you're lost, I think investment need to go in that, you know, organisations that need the funding, that are actually doing good work, that support women into work, to get into the schools. You know, have that representation of people, the lived experience, and actually come and talk to you about what it's like. You can ask us those questions, but the investment needs to go into the schools and bringing in people that can really support.
Yes. Does anyone have a view beyond that? Yes, Dilraj?
Well, I'd like to give this a positive spin. I'd like to say encourage employers to have improved representation of BME women in workplaces. We've really not touched upon in this conversation today, but workplace cultures are big influence in women's choices, young women's choices as well, to, you know, choose certain career paths or actually drop out of careers, especially if you've got really highly qualified degrees. So yes, it's absolutely essential that the majority of the resources need to go into building the capacity of these women. But I think it needs to be kept in the context that there's a whole demand side to it. We can have all the most amazingly confident and capable women out there, but if the market is not ready to receive that quality, then there's going to be a massive gap in services. So yeah, I think those have to go in hand in hand. And part of that would be charities like ourselves would be training employers to become more workplace inclusive.
Okay, education directly into workplaces. Yeah. Sergeant?
Agree with that, both education and, I mean, I've got some comments here from young women, and they're quite shocking as well. So I would also welcome everybody around the table, if they do want to speak to us, to Semfo Scotland, they're welcome to phone us. We could talk through some case studies, because it's not until you look at individual cases, individual people, that you actually get an insight into how they're feeling and where. For example, if I can read this out, it was a comment. I would also like career advisors to be more optimistic when discussing career options and understand and show there's a whole world out there. So touching on some of the stuff that was that we spoke about earlier on, the young women, they're not aware of the opportunities that are out there, and if we can even contact them at that education level where they're maybe picking subjects. Yes, you don't have to go into nursing. You can be an engineer. You can go into politics. So even not even at the leaving school age, even younger than that, we need some investment in there to open opportunities for young women coming through the school system and then going straight on to the employment level. And then, as we've said, we've talked about progression within employment as well. So, unfortunately, I like to have my cake and eat it. We need funding at all those levels.
Right across the board. Dilraj, back to you.
Thank you. I'd just like to add to that, yes, STEM subjects. I know there's a lot of work, already good work. Again, one of the models which we can look to. STEM subjects, how do we encourage young women to adopt STEM subjects, because they kind of generally lead to higher paying jobs. And the other aspect which we've not really touched on is mental health. I see a lot of you nodding, as in, you know, when we are kind of, I think it's across the ages, not just young women, lots of issues with multiple issues in life, and how we are able to engage with those issues. Do we have the resources? So I think mental health capacity building should be built in at schools to encourage confidence in young women.
Trishna.
When you're just talking about mental health, and also when in the workplace when people face racial harassment and things like that, there needs to be investment in somewhere in those areas where people feel comfortable that they can go and speak to somebody. Now, we know, like, we've got examples, we have examples of young women that have went and got a job and then they've realised that they are being bullied or discriminated against, and they don't want to take it any forward. They don't want to take it any further. They'll come back to us and say, I'm looking for a new job. And it's like, well, what's happened? I don't want to take it any further. And so then they will just leave quietly. And so the workplace that they have left will either have no idea about it, the reason why they're leaving, or else that they choose to ignore it as well. And that's a huge growing thing. And because we have women that are first, second, third, fourth generation born and brought up here, they really, really don't want to go down that route. They feel that that makes them more visible as the other and not part of the whole community. And it's this othering that keeps going on. And I know that at some point we have to make those kind of, I don't know, examples or whatever you call it. But if it keeps continuing, this is damaging. It's damaging people's mental health. We have young people having to combine, and in their heads they're living within two cultures. And they're having to struggle with them. And nobody takes that on board. And when, you know, like, 30 years ago when we started, I just thought, well, it'll change. And I was speaking to somebody who's 29 on the phone the other day, and she said to me, yeah, but it's just it's older people's thing, you know, things will change. I said to her, listen, 29, when I was 29, that's exactly what I thought. And I'm 67 now, and not, you know, and I feel, what's changed? So the thought process for even the younger people from the BME communities is still, well, things will change. And they won't change until the change happens at the top.
Yeah. Fergus, is there something in your own organisation that you think would make a big difference?
I mean, I think that I couldn't agree more with that point about workplace cultures and the focus on, you know, building and work with employers, you know, education with employers to support employers. I think is really important, because if that's not there and the availability of jobs in safe and supportive environments, then we can, you know, we need to address that. But I certainly think that, going back to what I said at the beginning about the potential of the apprenticeship programmes and the apprenticeship programme in school, the foundation apprenticeship programme, you know, the early signs in relation to equality and diversity, I think, are good. And I think, you know, perhaps in terms of gender equality, you could argue that that's actually too late, you know, that actually advice in terms of challenging stereotypes needs to happen at a far earlier age, in the early years. I think what we've maybe not talked much about as well today is the influence of parents and families in that space as well, because though teachers and careers advisors are key influencers, so too are parents and families. So perhaps an investment in some of that early years work as well. But I think potentially the potential of the Foundation Apprenticeship Programme is one to explore further.
I have a final question from Revity. That quick responses, please, to anyone who wishes to respond.
Thank you, Convener. So regarding attitudes, practice and policies, with the recent occurrence of Brexit, could you perceive any impacts on those areas?
I knew you would all look stunned at that one. Is there anyone who would like to respond to that? Dilraj?
I'm presuming this is in terms of workplace employers' perspective?
Generally, generally, yeah.
Well, in the spaces I work in, there has been a general understanding of the implications of what Brexit, is going to bring. So I would say it's a positive. Well, not that Brexit is positive, but the fact that that kind of gives my personal politics away. but the fact that employers are considering the ramifications and how it can impact people who are working in the organisation. So the general feedback we've had is employers are, quite concerned about the well-being. So there's been a general kind of positive element from our end. I don't know if anybody else has.
Miriam and Noor wanted to come in this as well. So do you have something to add to that before we go to anyone else, Miriam?
It was another general question, but do you see any correlation of the impact of Brexit in the rise of Islamophobia, perhaps in Scotland? And if so, the impact of that on young ethnic women in the workplace and or school?
I'm not the best placed individual from the organisation to kind of give you details on that. I'll be happy to put you in touch with the right person for it. However, I have come across that there are general concerns of how Brexit is playing out for Muslims in Scotland, including Muslim women. So yes, there are concerns about that, but I wouldn't be able to give you the accurate estimate.
Noor, first of all.
Also related to Islamophobia in Scotland. So,
yes, Trishna.
When people talk about Brexit, and we've witnessed lots of different things over the years, but that has not only affected women from the Muslim community and Islamophobia, and I think that then helps people to kind of pinpoint it to one community, whereas there is a whole range of South Asian communities, and people don't differentiate with you whether you're Muslim. As long as you're brown, you're going to suffer, and that is exactly what's happening. And the focus is on Islamophobia, so there are places where people from the Muslim community can go and maybe get help or not, or put it out there, but people from other ethnic communities don't have that space. And so there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement by the Scottish Government and other people about this term, and to make it inclusive, because there again, it's kind of divide and rule. So you're focusing on Islamophobia, but what about everybody else? And then that causes undercurrents within the communities. And people need to acknowledge that.
Okay, that concludes our evidence session. Thank you very much, panel. Pass to Sarah.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to all our panels today for your insights and your time on obviously the matter of transition to employment for minority ethnic women. Thank you.
Close this session, and we'll now move into private session.